$1 invested in Warren Buffett's company at the start of 1965 was worth $60,994 by the end of last year, an overall gain of just over 6 million%, according to Berkshire Hathaway's own 2025 annual report. That's what 60 straight years of patience, held without interruption, can do to a single dollar. That number is about as close as modern finance gets to a controlled experiment in compound interest. Every year Buffett held on, patiently, without panic, without touching the pile, turned a dying New England textile mill into one of the largest companies on earth. And on the first morning of this year, for the first time in 60 years, someone else took the wheel. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly how the takeover of a failing cloth manufacturer turned into a personal fortune of nearly $140 billion, why more than 90% of that money arrived after Buffett turned 65 years old, and why his own hand-picked successor just admitted, in writing, that the math of compounding is now working against them. On May 10, 1965, Warren Buffett's investment partnership took formal control of Berkshire Hathaway, then a struggling textile manufacturer that had spent years losing ground to cheaper overseas cloth. Buffett never fixed the weaving business. He wound it down piece by piece over the next 2 decades, and every dollar the mills freed up went instead into insurance companies, banks, and stock. By 1982, when Forbes published its first-ever list of the 400 richest Americans, Buffett made the cut with a net worth of $250 million. That placed him among the wealthiest people in the country 17 years into running Berkshire, and, in hindsight, still right at the very start of the compounding curve, not near the middle of it. Track the growth of $1 invested at the start of 1965, and the line barely moves for years at a time, then suddenly steepens. By 1985 that dollar of Berkshire stock was worth roughly $200, against about $6 for the S&P 500 with dividends reinvested. By 2005 it had passed $7,000. And by the end of 2025, according to Berkshire's own annual report, it stood at $60,994, versus $461 for the S&P 500 over the same 60 years. Compounding was never a straight line. In 1974 alone, Berkshire's per-share market value fell 48.7%, nearly cut in half in 12 months, according to that same annual report, as an oil embargo, double-digit inflation, and a brutal bear market gutted stock prices across the board. Buffett didn't sell into it. He kept buying, at prices that only look obviously cheap in hindsight, because almost no one else was willing to. Buffett turned 65 on August 30, 1995. At that point, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, his fortune stood at roughly $12 billion, already an enormous sum by any normal measure. And yet Barron's has calculated that close to 95% of everything Buffett is worth today was created after that birthday, not before it. In 1999, at the peak of the dot-com bubble, Berkshire's per-share market value fell 19.9% while the S&P 500 gained 21%, according to the same performance table. Buffett was mocked in the financial press for refusing to buy internet stocks he said he didn't understand. The correction came fast. In 2000, Berkshire gained 26.6% while the S&P fell 9.1%, and by 2002, as the S&P dropped a further 22.1%, Berkshire had held on to a solid gain across the same stretch. In March 2008, Forbes named Buffett the richest person on the planet, with a fortune of $62 billion, finally passing Bill Gates after Gates had held the #1 spot for 13 consecutive years. Buffett kept the title for exactly 1 year before the 2008 financial crisis knocked him back down to second place. A decade later, in early 2018, Forbes put Buffett's fortune at $84 billion. He was 87 years old, an age at which most people have been retired for 2 decades, and his wealth was still climbing at a pace most professional fund managers spend entire careers chasing and rarely catch. The gap was never really about picking one miracle stock. According to Berkshire's own 2025 annual report, from 1965 through 2025 Berkshire's per-share market value compounded at 19.7% a year, against 10.5% a year for the S&P 500 with dividends included. Less than 10 percentage points of extra annual return, held for 60 straight years without interruption, is what turned $1 into $60,000 instead of $461. Comparing Forbes' $84 billion estimate from early 2018 to its $139.8 billion figure from July 2026, Buffett's personal fortune grew by roughly $56 billion in about 8.5 years, an average of nearly $18 million a day, arriving well into what would be anyone else's third decade of retirement, and largely without him selling a single share to fund it. By the end of 2025, the float generated by Berkshire's insurance businesses, premiums collected today against claims that won't be paid for years, invested in the meantime, reached $176 billion, up from $88 billion just a decade earlier. Layer on Berkshire's stock portfolio, led by concentrated stakes in Apple, American Express, Coca-Cola, and Moody's, worth nearly $300 billion combined, and you get a machine built almost entirely to keep compounding, quietly, in the background. As of July 16, 2026, Forbes puts Buffett's personal net worth at $139.8 billion, ranking him the 10th richest person alive, at 95 years old, decades past the point where most personal fortunes stop growing at all. On December 31, 2025, Warren Buffett served his final day as Berkshire Hathaway's chief executive, closing out 60 years in charge. The next morning, Greg Abel, a Canadian utility executive Buffett had been quietly grooming since naming him a vice chairman in 2018, became CEO. Buffett stayed on as chairman, still reportedly in the Omaha office 5 days a week. In his very first annual letter as CEO, Abel wrote something Buffett rarely stated so bluntly. At Berkshire's current scale, he wrote, quote, "The math of compounding works against us." The same force that had turned a dying textile mill into a fortune approaching $140 billion was now, by its own new steward's admission, running in reverse. Since 2006, Buffett has given away more than $60 billion of Berkshire stock to charity. Barron's estimates that without those gifts, his personal fortune would already be north of $300 billion. He chose to let the machine keep running for other people's benefit instead of his own balance sheet. For 60 years, one man's patience turned a single dollar into more than 60,000, surviving a near 50% crash, a bubble he was mocked for sitting out, and a financial crisis, without ever selling the underlying business. His own successor now says, in writing, that the same force is working in reverse at Berkshire's size. So the real question isn't what Warren Buffett built. It's whether anyone, even the person he chose himself, can keep compounding a fortune that has already gotten too big to compound.